Yes, you guessed it, we are in the shed again today. And despite there being spring outside, inside here it's pretty cold. Hello amazing humans on the net, welcome to my channel, and today we're filming one of my favorite episodes to film, which is a monthly reading wrap-up. And yes, you've guessed it, we're doing it from my shed because it's a Wednesday, and even though on a Wednesday I usually have the house to myself, that's not the case today. My house today is full of people. By people I mean family. And so I have removed myself from crowded area and brought myself to the garden shed so that we are not disturbed in our little chat. I'm not worried though, because I've got my hot tea, I've got my trusted notebook, and I've got all the books that I've read in March just here behind me, except for one which I read on Kindle. But we'll talk about it in a minute. I don't know about you, but March has gone very quickly for me. I didn't have any special events, no gigs to go to, no holidays. Nothing dramatic happened either, which is great. No news is good news, right? But for some reason it has gone very quickly. In March I read 7 books, and as usual we'll talk about all of them in chronological order as I've read them. Let's dive in. The first book I finished in March was this very well-known classic, and yes, I'm aware I'm a little bit late to the party, but what do they say? Better late than never. And the classic I'm talking about is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I now completely get the hype about this book, which I agree with everyone that is fully deserved. I mean, Atticus Finch. Can this honourable, compassionate, principled man please be a leader of our country, or any country? I think if he would be a leader of any country in the world right now, the world would be a much better place. And if we had leaders of every country like Atticus Finch, then, well, what can I say? The world would look very differently. And actually not even as a leader. If he can't be a leader, Atticus Finch is the type of man you want for your brother, for your son, for your husband, for your father. He is just amazing, isn't he? Obviously, this is a very well-known book. I'm not going to be talking about the plot. You just simply have got to read this if you haven't read it yet. What I would say though is that I think the approach taken in this book to tell the story through eyes of a child, and actually I think I've read somewhere that that idea came to Harper Lee from Truman Capote, who knew Harper Lee. I think they grew up in the same area. Anyway, that concept was very clever because it made the story not only easier to follow and also more relatable, but it gave it a bit more nuance. I think the themes in this book, the topics, are just as relevant as they were when the book was published in 1960. This is an American novel, but I think it should be made a compulsory read in schools in Europe as well, just like it is in the United States. At least I think it's still read at school. And again, it made me think about this urge that we have in us as humans to create outsiders around us. And it's that urge that we have to fight and get rid of. Very powerful story, and I'm very happy I finally got around to reading it. 1 second. Ah, that's better. Right, the next book I read, actually, let me just switch to this side. I think you'll get a little bit less glare. I want you to be able to see the cover of the book well. The next book I read was Where Angels Fear to Tread by E.M. Forster. I have his other book, Howard's End, which I haven't read yet. I decided to read this one first just because it was set in Italy, and that always appeals to me. Do you know what was my immediate thought after I've read this book? It gave me the same feeling as watching the movie Dogville, directed by Lars von Trier. I don't know if you've seen this movie, but it's hard watching. It's not for the faint-hearted. It's not a horror. There's no violence or anything like that. It's just that, to me, both E.M. Forster and Lars von Trier have this knack for making the audience look very closely at the darker side of human nature and exposing it to the daylight and making us confronted. And it's definitely not the most comfortable experience, but should we be reflecting on these things? Yes, I think we should be reflecting on these things. This book, I wasn't sure if I liked it so much, but the more I think about it, the more I like it, the more it sits with me, the more I respect Ian Forster for so unapologetically creating a bunch of characters, all of whom are completely unlikable. You will not like any of the characters in this book. And the fact that he wrote this when he was 26 years old is just astonishing. This is, by the way, his first novel, and a lot of people say it's actually his worst novel, especially in terms of writing. But for a first book at the age of 26, and the fact that he very bravely explores human nature in the way that he does without shying away from critique and really honest insight into the society at the time is really something. And the way it's written, you really meet the characters through the dialogues. The dialogues are important and they take up a lot of space in this book. In case you haven't read this book, this is about, well, a family in England whose son married this woman. They have a child. The son dies, and by way of trying to help the wife with grief and also to give her a bit more worldly experience, the mother-in-law and the brother-in-law sent this widow to Italy. And when in Italy she meets someone, she falls in love, and so the story evolves. And by the way, it is quite dramatic because despite the small size of the book, this is only 168 pages, you have something very dramatic happening pretty much every 20-30 pages of the book, and the ending is quite dramatic as well. So yes, definitely peculiar and baffling at times, but I am intrigued and I will definitely be reading more E.M. Forster. Let me know which one of his books are your favorite. Next, I read Hetty Dorval by Ethel Wilson, a Canadian writer who wrote children's stories in 1920s, and then she started writing adult stories as well. This one was published in 1947, and I did talk about it already in my separate episodes on lesser known classics. I will link it above. This is a lovely little book. I really enjoyed reading it. It's a coming of age story where we've got this 13-year-old Frankie who lives in a countryside in Canada, and one day she meets this woman who suddenly arrives in town and she is completely impressed by her and they become friends. But really the story is about Frankie and about how she needs to grow up and how she needs to take responsibility for her actions in order to take full ownership of her life, and not only her life but that of friends and family. It's a beautiful little story. I did say in my other episodes that I think this should be one of those books you find in bookstores located on the shelves of young adult fiction or teenagers fiction, because I think it's a very, very relevant story. Even though it was written obviously in the 40s, I think it's still relevant, and I think that our teenagers could learn a few good things from this book. I'm looking forward to discovering more books published by this publishing house called Persephone. They come out in these grey, very unique style covers. Next book I read was Panenka by Ronan Hession. He's an Irish author, and this book was on my TBR for 2025 because I've already read his other book titled Leonard and Hungry Paul, and I loved that book. And in this book, just like in this book, the author takes very ordinary things and ordinary life and makes it extraordinary. The main protagonist here is a middle-aged man who used to have a career in football. And by the way, you don't need to know anything about football. Don't be misguided by the title. This is not about football. The main protagonist is an ex-footballer, but actually the book is not about football. Anyway, so he's this older man who needs to face few realities in his life. And so we've got the themes of regret, we've got the theme of second chances, we've got the theme of relationships and specifically family relationships, the theme of forgiveness, the theme of death as well. There is definitely melancholy of some sorts in Hessian's writing, and also I would say sincerity. There's a sincerity in his writing. Again, just like this one, this is a very quiet book, although I think this one is more sad than this one. This one is a bit more hopeful, but I loved it just as well for its ability to very gently explore the more fragile side of human nature. This author has a rare ability to really capture you as a reader. Well, it captured me as a reader, you know, in a way that it really makes you contemplate and sit there quietly and leaves you deep in thought. I highly recommend this book. I think this probably is my favorite book I've read this last month. Let's move on to the next book, which was This Safekeep. This book, as you may know by now, has been longlisted for Women's Prize for Fiction 2025. This has been on my TBR for quite a long time, and I managed to find a copy of it on a library shelf, so I was very excited, grabbed it, and I finished it in March. I would be very interested to hear what you think about this book. This is definitely beautifully written. The prose is very lyrical and you have excellent character transformation. This book is set in Netherlands, by the way, in 1960s. And I'm not gonna tell you too much about the plot because the less you know about this book, the better. So yes, I can't believe this is a debut novel because this is really excellently written and you've got this very heavy atmosphere from page 1 of the book, and that atmosphere is very well sustained. And also I liked how the narrative shifted from one character to another towards the end of the book. I really liked how the theme of loneliness was explored here, and also there are some gorgeous sex scenes in there. And actually for such a small book there are quite a few of them, but they very beautifully put together. I do have two small gripes with this book. And I'm not sure if they entirely fair, but one is the ending. I felt like the ending was unnecessarily Hollywoodish. It was just very neat. Too neat. But maybe that doesn't matter that much. I guess it's the type of ending that gives the reader certain satisfaction, I would say. But the other thing is that I guessed the big twist in this book about probably halfway through the book, if not 1/3. And because that big twist is a huge benefit to the story, if not one of the major pluses of the story, it kind of lost its magic on me that maybe it would have had on a reader that didn't guess the twist, if that makes sense. I wanted to say something more, but I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to spoil it for you, okay? Just read it, let me know what you think. Moving on to Effi Briest by Theodor Fontane. Theodor Fontane is a German writer. He published this book in 1895. It is set in Prussia, or Kingdom of Prussia, what the country was called at that time. And we follow a story of Effi Briest, who in the beginning of the book, is 17 years old, and from the very first pages we find out that she is going to marry Baron Instetten. I talked about this book already in my separate episode, again from the mini-series called Lesser Known Classics. I will link it above. It is an excellent book, and you know, I think about this book still every single day. It really stayed with me in that sort of bit of a haunting way. This is often compared to Anna Karenina and to Madame Bovary, which I wouldn't be inclined to agree with. I think this is a very different book. You have some similar themes, but I wouldn't be guided by that comparison. But yes, we follow Effi Briest, who is facing challenges of growing up and married life and being part of this aristocratic society. Really great complex characters in here, and also really clever writing, in a sense that Fontaine here has left some of the events within the story off page. So it is for the reader to almost fill in some of the details in their own imagination, which I really actually enjoyed. If you were to ask me what this book is really about, now having thought about this book even more, I think this book is all about the question how much control we really have over our lives. And I think I'm going to leave you with just that. I think it's an underrated European classic that, you know, should be read in the same way that Goethe is read, or Thomas Mann. Highly recommend. By the way, if you have any other suggestions in relation to my mini-series Lesson on Classics and what books you would like me to discuss, let me know. If you've read a classic that no one is talking about and you think we should talk about, then please let me know. I have been really enjoying reading these type of classics recently, so yes, very happy to follow your suggestions. And for the final book, I don't have a copy because I read it on my Kindle, and that was An American Marriage by Tayari Jones. I'm holding my notebook with my notes that I've written about this book to help me remember. So this is again a book that a few years ago, I think it was 2019, won Women's Prize for Fiction. This book is really about a relationship and a love that has lost its momentum. I know that it was marketed as this book about a black man who was wrongfully imprisoned for a crime that he did not commit, but actually the book is not focusing on injustice almost at all. This is definitely about the relationships. So I do have a bit of a issue with the way the book was marketed because it was a bit misleading. Nevertheless, I really enjoyed reading this book. The writing had a certain unique quality to it. The narration, by the way, is presented in turns. So we hear from the man, his name is Roy, the man who was wrongfully imprisoned, and his wife Celestial. There is also a third character, but there is much less narrative from him than from the other two main characters. And by the way, I'm not sure if I liked the main character especially, but maybe that was deliberate. They were definitely presented in this very raw, honest way, and especially the relationship was really deeply analyzed. I need to say this to you, that 70% of the plot happens in the first few chapters of the book, and then 30% happens at the end of the book, and all in between you have character study and relationship study. Okay, so this is definitely character driven book and not a plot driven book. If that's not something you like, then I wouldn't recommend this book. But overall, I enjoy this book. It would be interesting for me to see again other books from that year when this book won Women's Prize for Fiction, because it's hard to believe there were no better books. The most interesting thing about this book that I found was how really well were presented the two very different backgrounds to these two main characters, and how these two different backgrounds and different family experiences shaped these characters' lives and their aspirations and their outlook on life as well. Again, a little bit like in Effi Briest, we have a question here around how much control we really have in our lives. That's my 7 books. Let me know what you've read in the month of March. I'm excited about April because I will be reading the shortlisted books for Women's Prize for Fiction. And yes, I will be letting you know all about them. Big whoops, because I wrapped up this video, packed up all the gear, and then realized I forgot to talk to you about the word of the month. As you know, I like to pick one word from a book that I read each month that is maybe a little bit less known, just because I have this huge love for the English language. And so this month I picked a word that was used in this novel Panenka, which I talked about, and on page 88 there is a description of people working in a bar, and they are described as taciturn. So here's the actual quote. The staff here are taciturn, probably because it's so loud, which makes it harder for them to engage in conversation with their customers. I think I have come across this word before, but I don't use it on everyday basis, and I forgot what it meant. So I looked it up, and in the dictionary it says taciturn is an adjective of a person and describes someone who is reserved or uncommunicative in speech, saying little. And the example that is given: after such gatherings she would be taciturn and morose. So there you go. I think it describes me after filming each video, as I tend to become a bit taciturn. That's it for today. I hope you enjoy this monthly reading wrap-up. If you like my content, please don't forget to subscribe. And for all those of you who are already subscribed and are watching my videos, thank you so much. I really appreciate my little community here in my corner of the internet. And as usual, I will see you next week. Have a great weekend and a great week.